Welcome, everyone. I still see we have some more folks coming into the webinar. Thank you so much for attending this online teach-in as part of the Reclaim Our Future campaign against the IMF and World Bank on its 80th anniversary in existence. This is the IMF World Bank 101. We're about to start. If you're coming in just now, please change your name so we can know who you are and add your organization too, so we know all of the different friends and comrades that we have on this webinar today. And put in the chat, let us know where you're coming from, what part of the world you're in, if it is evening, if it's afternoon, if it's morning. We have many people logging in for this very important teach-in today. So let us know who you are and let's get started. My name is Cody Urban. I am the treasurer and a member of the Global Secretariat of the International League of People Struggle. And I'm also a member of the Global Secretariat of the Resist US-led War movement. And this teach-in today could not come at a more needed time. It is the 80th year since the fated Bretton Woods conference that launched the so-called Bretton Woods institutions. So this is the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, the World Bank, or WB, which are often put together as the IMF World Bank or IMF World B because of just how much closely they work together, as well as the free trade institution that would one day later become the WTO, or World Trade Organization. What this means is we've had 80 years of plunder, 80 years of exploitation, 80 years of international financial institutions running the show about our future, our economic livelihood, the way we get a job, the way that we can make food, the who determining how we can live our lives, and ultimately determining who gets to profit over our labor around the world. This is what has been at stake for the past 80 years, and it has only deepened the immiseration of the working people of the world. This is the legacy that the IMF World Bank has had after 80 years of being in existence. And it has not just led to more privatization and economic devastation. It has led to the most vicious wars of aggression around the world as the countries that are trying to one up each other over how much of the slice of the pie, of the investment pie of the IMF World Bank they can get. This has led to the devastating wars that we have seen in the global South, to more and more colonial and semi-colonial counterinsurgency wars, all to just pave the way for more and more fields of investment by this savage institution of the IMF World Bank. 80 years is far too long. That's why this teach-in is part of the Reclaim Our Future campaign, because that is really what's at stake. If we're going to fight against the IMF and World Bank, it really means reclaiming our future from the imperialists, from those who are trying to set the world on fire just to profit off of us. So thank you for coming in today. And this is the exact theme that we're going to talk about as we gear up in this campaign. So this teach-in has the objective of introducing or refreshing people's organizations about the basics of the IMF World Bank, how they work, their major policies and projects, and their 80-year history, and how they are instrumentalized, even in the context of US-led wars. It'll tackle country cases of people's struggle and resistance against these imperialist institutions. Our framework for today is we're about to hear from two very incredible speakers. And then after our speakers, we are going to have a brief open forum where you will be able to respond to them and ask them questions. We'll then have a short video intermission to get a little bit more background on the IMF World Bank and the Reclaim Our Future campaign. And then we're going to hear from two other very great speakers and community activists about the fight against the IMF World Bank. And I will also ask to please mute yourself if you are coming in, just so that we can help with the sound. Thank you very much. And then after our final two speakers, we will have another open forum and we will finish with some calls to action. And I will say that we will try to have a photo op at the end. So be ready to have your camera open if you feel comfortable at the end. So we will take a photo, all of us on Zoom together, and we can use it for the campaign. And we will ask if you have a piece of paper or an index card or something near you, we will write some slogans down that we can hold up. And we'll put those slogans into the chat so you know what to write down. But just be prepared to have your piece of paper and something to write with before the end of this webinar. Okay, but let's get started. So we're going to first introduce our first speaker, and I'm very excited to introduce my fellow comrade on the International Coordinating Committee and Global Secretariat of ILPS, Azra Saeed. Azra is an activist working on women's and peasants' rights. She works with Roots for Equity, a Karachi-based organization that works with small and landless peasants. She is the General Secretary of the International League of People's Struggle, the international formation that promotes, supports, and develops the anti-imperialist and democratic struggles of the peoples of the world against imperialism and all reaction. Azra, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Cody. Thank you very much. I hope I'm clear for everybody. Could you indicate that, Cody?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. Thank you so much. So I would really like to, since I have only 15 to 20 minutes, I really would like to start my presentation very quickly. Hopefully I can find it there. Okay. So thank you for having me here, everyone, and especially friends from IBON. The task that I have been given is to really talk through the IFIs, and I will really concentrate mainly on the IMF, because the IMF then sets the policy agenda, which the World Bank then very clearly implements. So starting with World War II, that because this was the inception of the imperialist, it was not really. The inception was the colonial period, of course, but the political divide of the capitalist and the social blocs happened right at the very end of the Second World War. And so these two blocs were created very clearly, and then it, sorry, let me figure out how to do. और इसको आगे पीछे कैसे करते हैं? There, got it, sorry. So before I go anywhere, I think it's very critical to understand the capitalist mindset, the imperialist mindset. And so early, right after the Second World War, around 1948, a US bureaucrat, let's call him that, stated very clearly that the United States had 50% of the world's wealth, but only 6% of the world's population. Therefore, the real task, according to Kennan, for the years to come was for the US to find ways to hold on to this position of disparity. So there was just no doubt about where US imperialism was going to head. And I will not talk about all of this, but just wanted to give you a sense that when we talk about the IFIs were not the lone institutions that the Americans created. And there was a whole range of other institutions, reforms that were happening in the US as one of the major, one of the major superpowers of the world. And the Lend-Lease Agreement of 1941, which really led to the formation of the military-industrial complex of the US, is a very critical point in history. I can't get into that, but I just wanted to let everybody know to take these to just Google Lend Lease Agreement, and then to understand how that has impacted the world, even as we speak. The bombs that are raining down in different parts of the world, specifically Gaza and Lebanon now, are part of this initiation. And this picture is of the atomic bomb that was thrown on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And the American Navy actually had a cake like the mushroom bomb, the mushroom which was created out of the atomic bomb. They had a cake made out of that to just show their jubilation and their victory of throwing atomic bombs on people. The other thing which happened also was the 1944 formation of the IFIs, the Bretton Woods institutions, as they're also known as, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And then another one was the Marshall Plan, which was really to stop the Soviet Union to spread towards Western Europe. So these were critical policies and programs that were created, but we will only look at the IFIs today. Other development policies or institutions include, of course, the Western academia, which is very, very critical in shaping the minds of what I call Mr. Browns and Ms. Browns, coming from the colonial, neo-colonial countries, coming from a class background, which are hand in hand with the imperialist world. Then the foundations, in our times, we have Bill and Melinda Gates, people like me who have a longer history in this world. We had the Rockefeller and the Ford Foundation, and of course, ever-present donor agencies which are there to corrupt, our people's organizations and to form institutions which are hand in hand with imperialism. So from here, let's just get into the IFIs. First is the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Its basic function is to provide loans for trade, to create budgetary buffers, let's say. When a country really needs some money to run its country, to run its economy, that is what the money is provided for. And the basic goal is to maintain balance of trade. On the other hand, the World Bank is supposedly, it provides loans for development. Now, this word has extreme impact on society. The word development itself really needs to be very closely dissected and understood, because the word development is very much a facade for imperialism in our parts of the world. So when we talk about the World Bank's context of development, it is mostly infrastructure development. It could be dams or transport systems, or it could be entire sections. For instance, they revamp education system into privatized education system. They give money to very, very expensive schools in parts of the world, especially I know in Pakistan, which then creates a model of education which is definitely class-based, as tiered, to create further Mr. Browns and Miss Browns to rule the world in hand with the US. The energy sector, as we know nowadays, is really one of the biggest areas with these so-called renewable energy sectors. And then it is, and for us, for semi-colonial, semi-feudal countries, agriculture is of critical importance. So they do this in all parts of our economies, but I've just mentioned some of them. Now, so this money which comes in the name of development, but the word bank is a capitalist word. It is the highest form of imperialism when the world is run by financial institutions. And the creation of the IMF and the World Bank is very much in this context. Now, to understand the workings of these institutions, please note that if you want to be a member of the IMF, you have to first, if you want to be a member of the World Bank, you have to be first a member of the International Monetary Fund. Most countries, if they have a reasonable sense of the people's needs, would prefer just the World Bank because it allows them infrastructure development or to develop their sectors. But you have to be a member of the IMF. The second issue that I always raise is who are the presidents of the IMF and the World Bank. For the IMF, the president always has to be a European person. And for the World Bank, it has to be an American citizen. Now, in the past few years, what they've started doing is they have started recruiting uh, people from the South who look like from the people from the South, but are actually born and raised in the US and are US citizens and truly hold the class interest of the imperialist bloc. So, that confuses people. Oh, look, that guy is from India, or he's from Pakistan, or he's from one of our countries. That is not correct. He is an American. So, in itself, the uh, the, the connotation of keeping control on this
Lahat ng
bank between
hindi lang
uh,
naman bumoto doon si ano,
is between
si Reload.
the Europe and the United States.
Yeah.
From there, friends, could you please mute yourself?
Mga
Kindly mute
bumoto
yourself.
nga yan eh. Hindi yan mga
Okay, so going on from there, we also need to know how one becomes a member of the IMF World Bank, and the membership conditionalities are also there. You have to give a certain amount of your country's wealth as to get a membership of the IMF. It is known as the quota system. So as soon as part of your country's GDP, which is 50%, and there are other conditionalities attached to who you are as a nation state, you are given one vote. Now that seems very fair, but then actually under the IMF ruling, countries can buy votes. So for 100,000 SDRs, which are called the special drawing rights, and that is the currency of the IMF, you can buy additional votes. And this is the main source of revenue for the IMF. This is how they get their money. So if that is the case, they have approved 50% increase in quotas, which means that the amount of money which they are going to earn from the members has been increased. Now, is that democratic? Is that something we can call democratic at all? So I'm going to examine that. This is the IMF members voting various statistics. So the advanced countries or advanced economies of the world have, which are 33 countries as at this point, and then the developing countries are 163. The advanced economies have only 3.1%, whereas the developing countries have 6.7%. I'm sorry, I can't see because of this. Okay, so 6.8% population of, we have 6.8 billion people in the developing countries, whereas the first world or the advanced economies has 3.1 billion. So half, but they hold almost 60% of the voting strength, whereas the rest, about 40%, is with the third world or the neo-colonial, countries like ours. Then again, if you look at only 7 countries, which are the G7 countries, they hold 41% of the voting strength. So all policies that are discussed in the World Bank, in the IMF, actually, these countries have overriding voting power, and they will not allow any kind of policy to be passed which is not in the interest of the imperialist bloc, especially the US and the other 6 G7 nations, which is, of course includes Japan, Germany, France, UK, Canada, and Italy. Similarly, these are also the countries which are part of NATO, the North American Treaty Organization, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And if you compare, US has 16% of voting rights, whereas if you look at China, China has 6%. Now, China and India together are like almost 3 billion in the world, and they have together only about 8 to 9% of the voting strength. So is this democratic? They keep on telling us that democracy is one vote, one person. And obviously, in the capitalist system, there is no such thing as democracy. And it's very important to highlight this issue when you are talking about the IFIs. Now, from there, I will now jump straight to the structural adjustment programs. Sorry, I think some of it here. So what are structural adjustment programs? It's number one, it was oil. I will not go into the history in detail. There's no time really. There was an oil crisis in the 70s. That was also hinged to the Arab war with Israel, the Zionist state, and the because of the Arabs stopping, especially Saudi Arab, stopping, they put an embargo on oil production. The oil prices just went up sky high. And what the Saudis and the Arab countries who are making a lot of money from the oil crisis started putting all their wealth into the American banks, and they are known as petrodollars. With this increase, because of the increase in oil prices, the debt which the third world countries had also increased massively, and they were unable to pay back their debt which they had taken from the IMF and the World Bank. I will just point out that the debt was never taken by the people. It was always taken by the nation states, which are governed by elites of our countries, which is governed by the militaries of our countries. And so the consumer goods, which are very expensive, the military weapons, which are only for protecting the elite and not for the people, were the result that we were in massive debt. And so the IMF stated that if you want to keep on getting loans from us, and we really needed those loans at that point, then you have to agree to the structural adjustment programs. The structural adjustment programs also many people call suffering of the Asian people, suffering of the African people, requires particular structural reforms, structural changes. They really want to cut down, they want to change the system from even a slightly people's oriented economy to purely capitalist economy. Up till the 1970s, with the Soviet Union in place, our economies was somewhat buffered because we had still labor rights. We had many of the bonuses which are now totally uh, um, have been abolished. What are the three policies that are part of SAP, structural adjustment programs? These are deregulation, privatization, and trade liberalization. And what does it mean actually? So deregulation is a policy where the government is no more there to help the people. It is now there for the corporate sector, for corporate policy. So the rule of law is there to cut down any barriers that are there for the corporate sector. The taxes that they pay are extremely limited. A very big issue is the government cannot cap prices, cannot control prices. So the prices of medication, of oil, of house rents, of food items just goes haywire. And another big issue with deregulation is that the employment which was guaranteed by the government sector has been totally eroded. It's absolutely gone. So then once the government's role is only to cater to the corporate sector, we all have a second policy called privatization, which is where the government is no more responsible for providing goods and services to the people. It is now the responsibility of the private sector. So all government sector that was providing either food items or was providing education or healthcare, all the public services are wiped out. And the same industry is now owned by the private sector. So suddenly we have wheat not being stored by the government. Like for us, rice and wheat are our staple foods in Asia. They are now being held by private sector. So the prices just go haywire. The prices are based on the market need. Another issue is quality. We paid triple the amount we were paying before, but the quality of goods and services is really, really very poor. And so that then there is a extreme people suffer immensely because on one hand, the prices have gone 3 times more. At the same time, the private sector has taken away jobs. There are no more private sector jobs, only temporary or contract or daily or piece rate of work is available. And that then means that intense job loss, and then whatever jobs that you get, whatever work that you get are based on hunger wages, around starvation wages. People sit for days waiting for work. And then that means that women and children are part of the labor market in a very big way. The third policy is trade liberalization, which basically means export and import. And again, if you think about deregulation, it basically means that now the government's job is to help the corporate sector to come and invest in the country. Investors are treated as gods. Just yesterday, Pakistan passed its 25th, made its 25th I don't know, but a standby agreement with the IMF. And the whole country has been opened up, all kinds of investors, mostly those that are backed by the Americans. There is removal or decrease in import and export tariffs or taxes, and that is the main revenue for governments. Taxes is how governments make money. So the governments are now left without any cash flow, and the people are at the mercy of the corporations to provide them with whatever they can. So we find our markets inundated with KFCs, with the Subway, all kinds of fast food which the country doesn't need. And these corporations then send back the profits from our countries back to their home countries. What are the impacts? The impacts are very clearly, especially if you look at agriculture, since most of our countries are agriculture economies, with the extreme increase in price of diesel and petrol, it becomes extremely expensive for the small and landless farmers to do agriculture. Cost of agriculture inputs, which include seeds, pesticides, fertilizers, all go up. And then at the same time, we find that trade liberalization allows corporate land grab and corporate farming in a massive way. All corporations are now taking over our lands for growing food, and that food will be taken out of the country. It is also for cash crops, especially for biofuels. So the impact is increase in landlessness, indebtedness, rural to rural migration, rural to urban migration, and rural to international migration. And that's why we have massive numbers of people who are migrating from our countries to countries like the Middle East or further down to Europe and the US. So let me just
And really quick,
summarize.
Azra, we're about at time, so just giving you a time warning
Yes.
to wrap up if you can.
So the
Thank you.
impacts are, yes, joblessness, indebtedness, um, high levels of food insecurity, and cheap surplus labor. So the three main conclusions that I have is there is forceful implementation of neoliberal policies at the cost of the people's movements, at the cost of people standing up for their rights. And there is deliberate dismantling of local agriculture industrial production systems. There is deliberate pauperization of the people so that the people are too hungry and too poor to stand up and fight. And so my last comment is, of course, there is nothing else for us to rise, resist, and dismantle imperialism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Azra. There couldn't be a better closing statement to rise, resist, and dismantle imperialism. Thank you for really getting us into the mindset of this savage institution. Like Azra said, there's no such thing as democracy under capitalism. And running the show at the whole time of that whole system has been the IMF World Bank. Thank you so much, Azra. We have well over 100 people on this teach-in now. Let us know what you thought about Azra's comments, her analysis in the chat here. I mean, this is shameless. I mean, this is a system where you can literally buy votes to get into this global country club where US generals are cutting cakes, a literal cake of the world with an atomic bomb over it. That's the mindset. That's the actual class interests of these institutions here. There's nothing left to do but to rise, resist, and defeat imperialism. So thank you so much, Azra, for that. We're going to keep going with our teach-in. Next speaker is Professor Roland Simbulan. a retired professor at the University of the Philippines. He's written 9 books on Philippine-US security relations, US military bases, Philippine foreign policy, the history of covert CIA operations in the Philippines, and US foreign policy in Asia Pacific. He's currently the vice chair of the Center for People's Empowerment and Governance, a public policy think tank. From 1987 to 1995, Roland served as a senior political consultant at the Philippine Senate on foreign policy and national defense policy. In this capacity, he helped design strategies and tactics for the historic rejection of U.S. bases treaty on September 16th, 1991, as well as the post-bases alternative development plan and bases conversion legislation of the Philippine government. To keep us going, we'll pass it over to you, Roland.
Okay, good evening, good morning, whichever part of the globe you are located. First of all, let me thank the Ibon International and the ILPS for inviting me to be a resource person on this teaching, online teaching on the IMF World Bank 80th year of imperialist plunder. I would like to, before starting, I'd like to emphasize that the IMF and World Bank are are some of the tools and instruments of imperialism in the world, no? And right now, I'd like to go to the fundamentals of the concept of imperialism in order to present broad strokes of this concept. No, okay. Can we flash the first slide, please? And by the way, the World Bank and IMF are literally working in tandem. You know, if you happen to be in Washington, D.C. and visit Pennsylvania Avenue, you will see that their headquarters are literally right beside each other, no, in Washington, D.C. I don't have the photo of that, but let me now begin by presenting the fundamentals of imperialism, no, origins and modern instruments. Okay, next, please. Next slide, please. The concept of old and new imperialism have substantially the same goals, no? The economic, political, military, and cultural domination of subject peoples, and the capture and control of the sources of cheap raw materials and sources of cheap labor. And even today, this is still the motivation of imperialism. Next, please. Okay, continue. Uh, the capture of modern day imperialism has modified and improved on the methods of old imperialism. The main engine is global capitalism, and its working slogans are words like globalization, privatization, liberalization, deregulation, free trade, which Azra has mentioned earlier. And by the way, the IMF is the one that tries to influence the macroeconomic policies and plans of governments all over the world. Well, the World Bank is the soft weapon which it uses to discipline countries that try to react or resist the control of the IMF's influence, especially in economic and macroeconomic policies. But through these methods, the sharks devour. Can you remove this what's that the thing that's covering my slides? In this
We'll try to remove it. Yeah, we'll
the
try
big
to remove
eliminates
it.
the small, the rich the rich controlled the small. And precisely, I just wanted to mention to you that when when some people who critique or mention the World Bank and IMF, they're actually talking about the uh, rules-based international order, because these are the instruments and tools of the rules-based international order that imperialism created, especially after the Second World War, in order to control the economy. Okay, continue, please. So the use of more subtle and crafty methods of indirect control by the imperial power, which operates insidiously, awaiting a chance to entrap its victims, employs deceptive ways of gaining an economic motive, very harmful to the people of the captive nation, as Asra has earlier mentioned, but very enticing to the native ruling elites for the opportunity to share in the loot. It not only increases their wealth, but it also enhances their dominance and power over the masses. Next, please. Next slide, please. The use. Wait. Please wait before you move the slides. No? The use of compliant native rulers, mercenary elites, corrupt oligarchs, military dictators, etc., and out puppet regimes have been part of the toolkits of imperialism. And that's why when some nations or countries, through their states or governments, resist these impositions in their macroeconomic policies using soft power, that is when U.S. Imperialism uses uh, military means, military intervention through either instigating coup d'etat, or if it is a threat from another country, that's when they also engage in conflicts. Next, please. Next, please. From the vassals and rulers of protectorates and client states, they are now called friends and allies and partners in defending democracy and freedom in the world under the leadership of U.S. imperialism. Next, please. Aid also is an important weapon, and that's why there's the World Bank, no? For domination and control. The same principle as elite politics in the local country level. The ruling elites exploit the masses, take control of their lands, plunder the natural wealth and resources, become multimillionaires and billionaires. When the opportunity arises, such as during natural calamities and disasters or during election time, they come out from their luxurious surroundings, all, roll up their sleeves and transform themselves into compassionate do-gooders, philanthropists, bringing good and other aid to the masses they have exploited and impoverished for so long. Next, please. Next slide. Okay. Next slide. And just to continue that part, no, that, wait, okay. When the opportunity, well, we finished this part already. Can we move to the next slide? The imperialists also use similar methods of deception and manipulation used by native ruling elites in their poor masses, but this time they apply it on a global scale. They feign compassion and pity for the starving millions of Darfur, for example, the tsunami victims of Indonesia and South Asia, the typhoon and landslide victims of the Philippines, the cyclone victims of Myanmar, etc. But they continue to defend and protect many of the corrupt rulers in the third world countries, including their unjust structures and practices of exploitation, which are mainly responsible for much of the suffering and poverty in the third world. Next, please. So we have here the the real aims of the use of aid. For example, some, some powerful countries use bilateral aid as well as multilateral aid, such as the one in the World Bank. No, well, in the case of the U.S., there is USAID, the ODA of countries like Japan, and also cultural aid, no, which they use as instruments and weapons to dominate and influence the smaller countries of the world. Thank you. Next, please. U.S. military aid likewise is used as an instrument of domination and control. First, the military, by its very nature, is a tool of the ruling elites to protect their interests and to safeguard their rule. National interests, as low as a slogan, those interests, whose interests are they really? Who define national interests except the elite? In an imperial setting, the interests of the global corporate elites, the oil companies, the financial giants, the captains of industries, the trading moguls, etc., who now have spread their tentacles all over the world, represent much of what they call national interests. That's what it really means, national interest, not the people's interest. So to continue, the military by its very nature is a tool of the ruling elites to protect their interests and to safeguard their rule. National interests, whose interests are they really? Who defines national interests? In an imperial setting, the interests of the global corporate elites, the oil companies, the financial giants, the captains of industries, the trading moguls, etc. This is what really is represented by what they refer to as national interest. That's why, as far as military aid is concerned, imperialism uses military aid to influence the military establishments of countries, and so that if those countries do not comply with the wishes of the IMF, their leaders are threatened with coup d'etat or threats to their power. The military, by its very nature, is a tool of the ruling elites to protect their interests and to safeguard their rule. So next, please, next slide. Okay, through with this slide. The real mission of the U.S. military is to protect and defend the empire. Let us remember that, no? That's why some authors refer to the bases of empire or the empire of U.S. bases. Ruling elites in the U.S. include the Pentagon, this is the U.S. Department of Defense, which defined the mission of the military, which is to defend the U.S. and to protect its U.S. national interests abroad. And it really means empire's interests. Next, please. Next. Next, please. To accomplish this mission, the Pentagon or U.S. Department of Defense has spread out its military forces in bases and installations outside the U.S. and distributed them throughout the world, putting them under several global operating commands. No? So they have divided the world like the American legions before, which divided their empire into several legions. Now this time the U.S. has divided it into the Northern Command, no, the Southern Command for South America, and here in the Asia Pacific, the Indo-Pacific Command, no. Next, please. And in Europe, there's the European Command. Pacific Command is now the Indo-Pacific Command. Central Command is in charge of the Middle East. And there's a new one. There's also an African Command for the entire Africa. These are the modern legionnaires of the American Empire, guarding their empire against revolts or resistance by the people against policies of U.S. imperialism. At the same time, if there are other imperialist countries that are threatening U.S. interests, these commands global commands are also there to protect American economic interests. Next, please. The other commands of the U.S. Special Operations Command, no? They have here the Special Forces, JSOC, Transportation Command, Strategic Command. This is the Nuclear Command of the U.S. and the Joint Forces Command. And also the CIA and FBI. These are the intelligence, domestic and international intelligence agencies of the world, which now use a lot of technological instruments and weapons such as satellites. Next, please. Now, U.S. military aid is also an instrument of repression. Recipients of U.S. military aid in third world countries are usually unpopular regimes who fear their own people, whom they have been exploiting and oppressing. Therefore, they are willing to support the global goals of the U.S. in exchange for badly needed military aid to fight their own people. The ruling elites can feel more secure with this military support from the U.S. Aside from providing the capacity of their own military and police, they also have the protective arm of the imperialist patron. Next, please. So these are some forms of foreign military assistance of the U.S. Foreign military financing to finance the sale of weapons and equipment. U.S. provides the money to pay for U.S. military equipment, peacekeeping operations, military assistance programs or MAPs, international military training programs, no, and excess defense articles. Next, please. Those are the U.S. military aid programs to its client regimes. The heavy toll, this takes a heavy toll on people's lives and human rights. Modern imperialism, with its accompanying methods of maintaining and defending its system of rule, takes a very heavy toll on the lives of the peoples of the world, particularly the poor and the defenseless nations of the third world. Likewise, the U.S. all-out support, military, economic, political, on ruling elites in their war against their own people exact a very heavy toll. Next, please. People's movements that seek to free themselves from foreign domination and from their corrupt leaders. Example, wars of national liberation in evil organizations are demonized as subversives, terrorists, and threats to democracy and freedom. Even civilian non-combatants who support this aim are prepared for the kill in counterinsurgency operations under the guidance of U.S. advisors and experts. This is one of the most callous and inhumane crimes of U.S. imperialism. Next, please. So we have seen in the various experience of many countries, gross violations and wanton disregard of human rights, including extrajudicial killings in committed by US-supported military regimes. Next, please.
And Roland, we have about 1 minute or so left, so just giving you a time check.
These are just photos of the effect. Next, please. Next slides. And these are the social costs of empire building, and imperialist aggression, that I have mentioned. I've just mentioned. This just specifies, specifics. Next, please. Cost, no. Next, please. Okay, can we have the next set of slides? Because I just like to jump to the next slide because that's so important. The other set that I had prepared. There's another small, short set. Agatha, can we have the other set?
Yes, we're showing it.
I can see it. Can you display it? I just want to outline here the important, most important elite groups in the U.S. Of U.S. imperialism, which are the most influential in influencing U.S. for. No, this is not the first slide. That's the last one. Can we go to the first one of that set? That's the last. That's the last one. The very first slide. I need the first one where I outlined the most influential lobby groups in the U.S. because they are the elite groups of the U.S. ruling class. Yeah. Next. Okay. Next slide. Yeah. This is on the U.S. global. This one. These are the most influential U.S. lobbies in shaping U.S. imperial state policies. Normally, their interests should be common with each other, but sometimes they compete for attention. First is the pro-Israel Zionist lobby, which owns and controls U.S. banks and the financial system. That's why the Israeli lobby is one of the most influential in the U.S. Government because the Jewish businessmen, the rich Jewish business control the banks in the U.S. Then there is the militarist lobby, which owns and controls U.S. weapons industries, no? And the NRA, National Rifle Association. This is the military industrial complex, as some authors refer to it. And the third one is the multinational corporations lobby. This controls the U.S. global oil and gas interests, including most of the top 100 U.S. corporations which have operations overseas. No, these are the most influential. Okay, next, please.
And just one more time check if we can finish up very soon, Roland. Thank
You can
you.
see in this global map the extent of U.S. Military, the most the how the almost 900 U.S. military bases and outposts are scattered all over the world to guard the U.S. empire against domestic resistance to U.S. imperialism as well as against other threats to its interventionist rule. You can see the dots there, different colors, and the forms of arrangements for keeping those bases or military installations to guard the empire. As I said, they are the legionnaires, modern legionnaires of the U.S. empire. Next, please. I think I have 2 or 3 slides left here. You can see here the U.S. pivot, so-called U.S. pivot, no, which as you can see in the red through the red arrows, where U.S. interventionary forces using their bases have been committed, no, using the whole might of the Pentagon, which has an almost an annual budget of $800 billion a year. In Iraq and Afghanistan alone, they spent for the years that they were engaged in war, almost more than $3 trillion were spent in that war, in these wars. That's why the U.S. Economy has really been affected. Next, please. Meanwhile, this has been how the so-called threat to the U.S. empire has been reacting, no? And this is, for example, China's One Belt and Road Initiative. You can see they're like these these roads here, which is linking the Chinese economy to many parts of the world because the reaction of China to the encirclement and containment by U.S. imperialism is to create the BRI to counter it so that it can counter the containment and encirclement policy of U.S. imperialism. And this is to connect the Chinese economy to all parts of the world, including especially the BRICS countries that China has organized. Next, please. Yeah, I think that's the last slide that I prepared for this presentation. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you so much, Roland. That was such a terrifying overview of, I mean, you called them the legionnaires of modern imperialism. I mean, if anything, that makes them the legionnaires of finance capital, the legionnaires of the IMF World Bank. I think that this really shows beyond a shadow of the doubt, especially after Azra's presentation too, that really, as for as long as these institutions stand, we will always be on the brink of military destruction of our planet. And our communities will always be having to fight to survive from foreign-backed counterinsurgency. Thank you so much. Well, now we're moving into the first round of our open forum for everyone on here today. We want to hear from you for a bit. A few things. Remember also that we are going to do a photo action at the end, so get your pen and paper ready to write. We also have a really important article that was shared in the chat. I don't know if Rodolfo or anyone can share it again, but the statement, 80 years, not another year more, reclaim our future from neoliberal dictates and false solutions, and shut down the IMF World Bank. This is a very important statement. So please share that around to spread the word about the campaign. But now we want to hear your questions for the speakers, as well as any points you'd like to make. I will ask very, very nicely, at least at first, to please, if you are making comments, please keep them very short. Try to keep them to a minute because we have over 100 people on our Zoom. We want to hear from as many as possible, and we are trying to keep to a time. So I might jump in and ask to finish up if the comments are going a little long, but also feel encouraged to ask questions to our speakers as well. You can use the raise hand feature on the Zoom so we can see you on your, we can see if you want to speak. You can also let us know in the chat if you want to speak, and feel free to even put your comments in the chat as well if that's easier for you. But actually, to start us off with the conversation, I wanted to ask if our friend from Palestine, Firas, is on. Firas from Al Marsad. If you would like to start the conversation, is Firas here? And if not, then
Yes,
I will.
I'm here.
Oh,
Thank you.
yes, Firas.
I was muted. Thank you for the chance to speak in this important webinar. I just want to explain and link a bit about what going on in Palestine regarding the genocidal war, which is happening until now, right now in Gaza, with the imperialism and the role of World Bank and IMF as the main manipulator of the governmental system in Palestine. We issued a paper regarding the World Bank role of assessing the damages in Gaza, which is not, of course, mentioning any kind of the military support of the U.S. Supporting the bombs over Gaza, tons of bombs over Gaza, financed and supported by the U.S. military funds and involvement directly. So the World Bank issued a report trying to play a technical role, which is one of the important and dangerous role they are playing, trying to sometimes to issue technical reports, not underlying and highlighting the political aspects, the political economy of the imperialism in Palestine. I will share the link of the paper we have written before, within the campaign, Reclaim Our Rights. And want also to thank you all for the continuous support for the Palestinian struggle for the liberation. Thank you all.
Thank you. No, thank you so much, Firas, and for this really important intervention, letting us know that really it's these institutions, it's the imperialist drive for this profit that is fully backing the genocidal assaults by the Zionists on Palestine. I'm sure I speak for everyone on the Zoom and all freedom-loving people of the world when we say, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you so much, Firas. Is anyone else like to take part in the discussion? You can use, again, the raise your hand feature or let us know in the chat. And as a reminder to keep your questions or comments very short. I'll wait to see if anyone would like to raise their hand. And as we're waiting to see if anyone would like to raise their hand to speak, want to remind everyone that once again, we'll have a photo action at the end of this to show for the campaign. Get your pen and paper ready. As we get into the next step of the webinar, we'll share what the slogans can be for you to write. But I see that Zahor, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Cody. Thank you very much. Uh, um, uh, I think the way of the UN works for the imperialist countries, and also IMF and World Bank also support them. So we must step up our fight to shut down institutions like this. And Azra has said about the structural adjustment program. In Pakistan, our women in our country are getting affected more. Uh, I'm asked to Azra how much the new structural adjustment program for Pakistan is a very horrible for us to say something what going on next in especially in Asia and uh, especially in Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sahor. There is a question from also from the watch party in Manila, which is, in what ways are the IMF World Bank linked to intensifying militarism around the world today, including counterinsurgency and occupation? So maybe I'll give it to Azra and Roland to respond to both Sahor and the Manila watch parties' questions and comments.
Thank you, Cody. I think it's a very critical question, what is happening to the women. And it's not only now, it's been happening now almost for 20 years, since late 80s, 1980s. So that's 40 years, actually. We just did a research, our organization Roots for Equity here in Pakistan, on the debt crisis and impacts on women, both urban and rural. And I will basically just touch on the urban for the moment, because it's urban settings are where you need to have rented housing. And generally the problem has been how to pay the house rent. And it was a shock to us that people are actually just finding it very hard to pay not the house rent, but the electricity bills. And climate crisis, our temperatures during the summer months was exceeding 40 degrees centigrade, which was unbearable. And women, especially, are at home. They are the ones who stay at home for 24 hours, and they have kids with them, they have the elderly, and there was no electricity. And why there was no electricity? Because the IMF has put the conditionality that you have to really pay the bills. If you don't pay the bills, they will come and cut the electricity connections. And so the women were just out of their minds trying to figure out how to do that. And then there was no gas, electricity and gas. They could not cook food for their children. First of all, they could not buy the food. And if they were able to buy the food, they were not able to cook the food because the gas meters were also in the same condition that they could not pay for the gas or for the electricity. So that's one. And then nearly all the women we interviewed in like 4 urban slums of Karachi had their husbands had lost jobs in the past 4 to 5 years, especially after the COVID wiping out of the job markets. And these women were now trying to sell or do any kind of small work that they could. Most of them under patriarchy can't leave their homes, or they have no skills to go out in the job market. And so they were like selling small homemade stuff like pakoras or samosas or whatever they could make at home, and sit outside on the doorsteps of their homes and sell that. Many women could not buy medication because medications which had been given freely by the government before are now so costly that they could not um, purchase that. I mean, these are the two which I will highlight. It's across the country, this condition. It's not only in Karachi, and the rural women are really, really just reeling. The one shelter that they have is that they do not pay rent, but most of them were now without 100% actually were without electricity because they had taken away the meters from all rural communities that we visited. So that's just briefly. And I would really like to say that the issue is not only of women, it is of men, because millions of people, millions of workers, rural and urban, are out of work. And the kind of screw that the Americans are pushing on Pakistan, because Pakistan has at the moment, it's part of CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And the Americans are doing their best to dislodge the Chinese from their hegemony in Pakistan, such that the US can come back. And so we have foreign funding coming from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, from Bahrain, these countries who are really part of the genocide that is happening in Palestine. And so I really want to, I think that linking the IMF to the war cycle of reaping benefits of people's flesh is very much, it's a duo. You cannot think of it separately. So I just wanted to highlight that on one side, we have no jobs, and then we have the Qataris and the Bahrains and the UAE people coming in, buying land or leasing land, growing food to take back to the countries, which are food insecure countries in general. So I'll finish with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Azra. And maybe just to keep up with the time, I'll give last two questions, last comment, and then especially give Roland the chance to respond to this one. One more question in the chat is regarding the interests of the US and China. Is there any debate or perhaps different groups in the World Bank and IMF? So there's that question. And then I also want to briefly give to Orida from PKMT, who has their hand raised.
Would you like me to respond to that?
Well, first let's let Orida share very briefly. If you can unmute and share now, Orida.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. First of all, all over the world, people are talking about IMF and World Bank. What are the policies of
I believe Orida
like privatization?
Sorry, Orida, you froze for a bit, but you came back. And could you just unmute one more time and briefly pose your question one more time?
Yeah, I just didn't have any question. I just want to give a comment, short comment, that we have a district meeting just 3 days before. So the women's of our district are more talking about the IMF regularities of policies, that women's are more talking about the privatization, the regulation that are impacted in their lives. And now they are so much frustrated that they even weren't given our time to talk about what IMF and World Bank are doing with them. So I just want to ask them that and at next month, 7 October, there was gone to 1 year to Palestine war. So they are so much frustrated that they are want to make struggle not for Palestine against IMF. They are more talking about IMF before 24. If we talk about Pakistan and about our district, no woman knows about IMF, who are IMF and what are they doing with us. But now they know who is IMF and what are they doing with us. So we are now against them, and we should do and we will do shut down IMF World Bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Arita. Of course, I think your comments and Azra and really every step of the way in teachings like this, we're reminded that some of the people who are most impacted and devastated in their livelihood by the actions of the IMF World Bank are rural and working class women. But as you reminded us, really all of us are being led by the women who are fighting back. And that's exactly the kind of movement that we're building against the IMF World Bank. To finish off, Roland, I will pass this last one to you to respond to that initial question regarding the interests of the US and China. Is there any debate or perhaps different groups in the World Bank and IMF?
Well, in the first place, China actually, after many decades of isolation, economic isolation, after the success of its revolution in 1949, when it finally decided to join these international financial institutions, uh, it was more to have access to markets, no, of the member countries that whose markets were dominated before by European EU countries as well as by the US, no, including Japan. That was really the purpose of China. China, I think, was realistic, not to try to take over, so to speak, U.S. Domination, because it's almost impossible of these institutions, which are very so tightly controlled by the United States and their European allies. No, now in terms of the competition between the two big powers today, U.S. and China, it is really it has intensified in many spheres. No, and this is why I think China is careful uh, in trying to operate uh, within the IMF World Bank, because these very institutions are under the full control of the U.S. No, the what China refers to as the rules-based international order, led by the United States, is exemplified by these institutions, because this international world order after the Second World War was created precisely so that the United States would dominate the world economically. And I think China does not want to play through those rules, does not want to compete through those rules. It wants to compete through its own rules, no, that it has created, no. Uh, 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 One point I would like to just bring to the fore is that the U.S. economy has really declined drastically in relation to other countries, especially in relation to China, so that uh, it is now trying to influence the other countries in the world, including its traditional allies, to increase their defense budget so that they can share with the US the protection and defense of the empire against against local and other competitors of the United States. No, That's why the IMF is very hard at working to try to influence their macroeconomic policies and including foreign policy, so that they will increase their defense budget to share it with the US defense spending, which has ballooned to at least $800 billion dollars a year. Now we can see this weakening of the U.S. economy, which has because of its forever wars, its overextension, by the fact that one, it is stepping up its campaign to encourage its allies to increase their defense budgets, and number two, the privatization of imperial U.S. wars, which before were financed just by the U.S. Treasury. No, in the past wars and conflicts that we have seen, the U.S. Has engaged in, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan. Uh, it has, I think, the U.S. government has relied heavily on what we call U.S. military contractors. No, this is they have which have privatized the imperial wars and many parts of the U.S. Department of Defense, or what we call Pentagon. No, because when we talk about today, when we talk about the military industrial complex in the U.S., it's not just the ones making weapons, no, the companies making weapons, which form a very important part of the U.S. ruling elite, but also includes, to a large part, the corporations that have formed military contracting companies, which the Pentagon is paying to engage in conflict in defense of the U.S. empire. You see, that is an indication how depleted the U.S. economy and the U.S. Empire is, uh, and how it has weakened, so that it has to rely on the privatization of its Department of Defense. Because if you have private military contractors, they compete, they bid for the contract. You see, so the lowest price possible that can be attained. That's the concept there, no, the principle there. It's not anymore, spend as you like as before, when the Pentagon would spend almost anything, any amount on what it wanted to, what any kind of weapon, artillery, missile, tank that it wanted to produce, no. So
Yes, and just one more minute if you can, Roland, so we can keep
yeah,
on. Thank you so much for the
so
response.
but right now, let me just warn that in the economic sphere, China, admittedly, and even many American economists admit this, China has almost really, if not overtaken the United States uh, in many aspects of the economy and technology, including especially technology. Now, the danger here is that while the US still maintains superiority, it may try to use this military superiority still to try to weaken China's economy. And that's why, we have this problem in the South China Sea, where China is reacting to the one supremacy of the US in its so-called American lake in the Asia Pacific. And the US
If we could just do maybe just a quick 10 or 15 second wrap
the
up here,
US
real
may
sorry,
employ
Roland.
its military might, to which China has the ability to react, and that's the danger there, including the possibility of, a nuclear confrontation between the two big powers. Thank you.
No, thank you, Roland, so much. And I think it's very important for all of us to keep in mind that there is a vicious competition over who will define or redefine the new quote unquote rules-based order in the future. And if that's not done by the people or the nations most impacted, it's just that new order is going to be just more exploitation and more militarism. That's why we organized to shut down the IMF and World Bank and defeat imperialism every step of the way. We are now going to move on to the next part of our program, which is going to start with a video intermission. So I want to pass it off to our tech team to introduce this short video that is going to be showing the victorious indigenous people's struggle in the Philippines against the World Bank funded Chico River Dam during the Marcos dictatorship, a great example of a people's victory that we need to emulate. So I'll pass it off to our tech team for that.
Timala kami siya timay sa nga Waitay ta mismo nga ilimiti dam pang kabilang dati dam 4 ne gusto nga ayan mi kete kaya garud nga pami barbarisadaan babae uray lagi siya upin umayda kete amoy tinaaramid mi agyang kami dyan nga gusto nga agbantay ti night and day nga dati mang balong kada kami sa inyan mi no dati balong nga umay kanan mi amin suti kanin mi amin no dati apad ad balong kada kami ta rabii ken aldaw ket ada kami dyan nga anya ag sisinublat
iti panagsalig met iti dahil yung labanan gapo iti research nga nag-research kami ta nguyong amin dahil yung dam ket dadaji ko na nga dati naganda di dam 2 dam 1 dam 2 dam 3 dam 4 pat so nga ti ayan mi jay boskalan ken kailiam mi iti bugnay winwanyaman dita talaga nga madangran kami jay nga tuta batay iti research uray man pay no adda kay jay nga to mapapanaw ka ta marugitan ti dam kas jay ti sumaliam iti struggle iti Chico Dam.
Yung sinabi niya siguro research, may legal organizer noon. Doon namin nabalitaan na nag-struggle dito ng mga direct effect. Hindi kami kasi direct yan, walang dam sa amin. Doon kami na pinagbuklod-buklod. Ano yung pan natin noon? Farmer cooperative. Nung una, nakalimutan ko na lang yun. Kaya doon kami tumutulong sa pagproprotest nila.
Da kami ijay garud ijay pagbarikadaan mi ta kami nga agaw awid ti napanunot mi naaramidin bakrasen mi dagijay kampuda tapno on pagyananda dagiti soldado aon pati NPCED di PC ti adda mapan agkampam pujay yung nga dahijay ti paminik ikat ti kampam puda iti iti ti dajay adamit laing ti nang asikaso kada kami nga ti papadi ada ti tumulong da iti mga ramid ti resolution ada tinangipan kada kami ijay Manila. May saak namin sa anak-anapan ng tulod. Kita jay kadua mini Mary Flor Parpan. Kadua mi nga napan ijay Malacanang yung hang kami nga nakastrip. Ayan ni Marcos. Ura man pa no nakastrip kami, baka ibasura directly petition mi. Yung resolution mi. Ijay tira aramid mi. At no adati legal mitlain nga na aramid mi.
Tata amin na manipud buntok ingana ito tamyangan. Litats men amin na kita. Iso nga, ti may saka nakita nga madi nga ipikto na dayta. Mapukpukaw ti bayanihan ti umili. Kas iti nga tayo nga mga simpay ti iligasyon ken aguma awanen ti mapanidjay ata mabuting dangarod iti militar. Kas jay ti napaspasamak iti panawin nga pumudot pa iti labanan iti Chikudam. Kas jay ti hangpong malipatan.
Kaya mismo nga ayan mi ada dahi ti soldado garut jay. Naramid da nga no man's land ijay naglikmutan ko ay ayan mi. Pete so nga dagijay bakbaka ijay banyo kadanwang binaltugan da iso da amin pinarpartida. So nga adu ti naaramid da ranggas da ayan mi. Jeti hanggang malipatan na aramid da. So nga adu mitlaan ti ay ada ti baka na kadanwang na maliti panungudan. So nga nag-armado da. Saan nga NPA jay ito. Ang pang NPA. Na 1979 nga may ti NPA jay Kalinga.
Anya iti awag jay nag-armas nga dagay.
Nag-armas daanga ko kasla dumepensa kada kami. Dumepensa iti ili.
Wala kami nakikitang NPA noon. Wala ka nang magawa, kalaban mo na. Armado ng government. Doon ka anak na interesado na sila sa Australia.
Bakit po?
Walang nakita namin na kwa. Yung kung legal lang. Hindi
Thank you so much for that video. I mean, this is such a clear example of the kind of development aggression that the IMF and World Bank pushes forward with that military might of the imperial states behind it. This is the kind of struggle that we need to wage in order to fight back. And just as they said in the video about, all the kinds of struggle against these IMF World Bank projects, even armed struggle on behalf of our organization, International League of People Struggle, we truly say that any struggle against any kind of imperialist-backed aggression, even armed struggle in that sense, is a just struggle. We need to keep uniting our just struggles against the militarist impositions of these brutal IMF World Bank programs. That's the way that we'll reclaim our future together. That also leads us into our next round of speakers, who will talk more about the kinds of resistance that are happening on the ground against the IMF World Bank projects. Our next speakers will each have 10 minutes. We're running a little bit over time, so please try to keep as much as possible to the time. But I will pass it next to, I will pass it next to Faith Casina, who is an community organizer with the Kayole Community Justice Center and Revolutionary Socialist League in Kenya. So Faith, I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, greetings everyone. You can hear me?
We can, Faith.
I'm so sorry, it's raining over here. So my voice might be a little bit muffled. One, I want, first of all, want to say thank you to everyone who has been offering us solidarity as we protest and demonstrate against this anti-people regime being led by Ruto. I will start, first of all, by saying that when Ruto got into power, he did not get into power genuinely. He got into power through deception and lies. You know, he lied there would be no more borrowing from IMF. He lied that there would be no more extrajudicial killing. He lied that the people would be able to access basic human needs like healthcare and education. But the first thing he did when he got into power was to start borrowing. Actually, the only time that Ruto has stayed in the country more than a month was during the uprising, since June to August 8th. That is when Ruto stayed in the country longer. He's never stayed in the country more than 2 weeks. He's always moving around and giving promises to the countries that he's visiting, that he's gonna give them labor. He's gonna support Israel. So there was a lot of things that people were demonstrating about, because this has been happening since Ruto got into power, borrowing and borrowing, and a lot of taxation. But even in the taxation, the money that they tax us, it's getting looted. So none of the money that we are being taxed is going towards making life easy for the people. I think if we're being taxed and our lives are better, I don't even think that most of us would complain. But you're being taxed and you're living in misery. That is why people went into the street. But I will say that when Ruto got into power, he started with privatization of state corporations. That is airports, ports. And then it started by defunding the education. Students were paying very little. Now they are paying 10 times what they were paying, you know. So even accessing education will be a nightmare for the poor, for the poor people. And then it went ahead to slash expenditure on welfare, like healthcare, housing, you know. There are no vaccines for children. There are no drugs for HIV. Then it also went ahead to remove subsidies on food. So when people, there is already high cost of living. People cannot afford 3 meals a day, or even 2 meals a day, live 3 meals a day. People are a bigger population, especially those who are living in the slums and informal settlements, are living below actually living below $1 a day. So when people went to the street, there was already that. The finance bill that was sponsored by IMF is what that triggered all this now. Like it was the tip, you know, like it was just this fact, like people are so tired of already what was happening. And now there is a finance bill that is proposing to add more taxes on petroleum products, more taxes on digital services, more taxes on diapers, on menstrual products, and a lot of other taxes that the finance bill is proposing. And now people are like, why are we even paying more while our money is being looted? Why are we paying more while the doctors have not been paid? Why are we paying more while the teachers have not been paid? Where is our money going to? You know, so that is one of the reasons why people went into the streets from June 18th to August 8th was to fight against the finance bill, but also after 20th, when Ruto started killing us, people now started saying that Ruto has to go, the regime has to fall. So it started with the finance bill, but people realized this is bigger than the finance bill. Because we saw when Ruto went to White House, he was given more military support, but when he came out, what we didn't know that is that he gave Chiwell land to build the biggest military base in Africa, in Kenya. Now what we were fighting against was that other African countries are fighting against foreign military bases to get out of Africa. But Ruto is actually giving permission to more military bases in Africa. While the British military base in Africa has a lot of cases of rape, of killings, and there has never been justice of the victims. So now, why would we need more military base? While also that would also threaten our sovereignty as a people. So that was also one. The other thing that was also happening while we were also pushing against while we were saying Ruto must go, and we are still saying Ruto must go, is sending our police to Haiti. We don't need our police to go to Haiti. Our police are killer police. Those who are watching as we were advancing towards parliament, you saw our police kill us on live TV. That is what happens every day. Our police kills people every day. We don't want our police to go kill people who are fighting for their freedom elsewhere. We saw our president support Israel, the killing of innocent people in Palestine. Why would our president do that? Only because he's a US puppet. And that is why he has to support what he's told. He's told turn left, he turns left. He's told do this, he does that. So that is why people are still pushing that Ruto has to go. When Ruto got into power, he made sure he has come for the basic of the thing. One, he came for the healthcare. I've already spoken about the healthcare. He came for the education sector. He defunded it. He stopped he reduced the expenditure on healthcare, and now he came for our food. The first thing he did was when he got into power was lift the ban on GMO and criminalize the use of our own indigenous seeds. Now, using exchanging our own indigenous seeds like we used to is a criminal act, in Kenya. He also introduced taxes for people who are keeping livestock, that you have to pay for your goats, for your cows, which was never there. It's like going back to the colonial times, And now the other thing that young people was mad at is that when young people asked for, when young people asked for employment, Ruto told us, I found you unemployed. Why are you asking me for employment? Where do you want me to get employment from? And the only thing that Ruto has been pushing for young people is to labor in the construction area of these affordable houses, and houses that are not and these affordable houses are not houses for the poor, are houses that can only be accessible to the rich. So those are some of the things that made us go into the streets. But also the last thing that Ruto came for, I've spoken about healthcare, education, food, and was land. There's been a lot of eviction and demolition since Ruto came into power, because he wants land, and a lot of land has been stolen from people. He wants land to build affordable houses. But the question we've been asking is, affordable houses for who? Because one house, one bedroom apartment is very expensive. So why are you building houses that are not affordable to the people who should access these houses? Because the rich have houses, the poor do not have houses. We have a lot of people on the street who cannot.
And just a 1 minute time check, Faith.
Yes, who cannot afford a roof on their head. So those are some of the things that people were coming out to say, that we want to just access the basic of the human need. We want IMF to stop forcing finance bill down our throats. We want the last thing that we were saying is that we want to live in dignity. And now the the things that people are still fighting for until now, and we are still pushing for, is land, food, and freedom, because we don't have land, we don't have food, and we're not saying food because we just want to be food secure. We want to also be food sovereign, because we want to own what we are farming, we want to know what we are farming, not what Ruto is pushing down our throats, and freedom, because we do not have freedom. We are even reclaiming our sovereignty as a people, just to have a voice, and to be able to fight for what we believe in, and to stand for what we believe in this country. Now, just lastly, because you've told me one, that I will say, when since the demonstration, we've recorded 61 more than 61 lives have been lost, and killed. I will say killed by this regime. More than 132 people have been reported missing, and a lot of people were arrested. And Ruto is still abducting more people, still killing more people, people who are who are fighting against this regime, who are pushing for better for this country. So yes, I think I'll stop there, and I'm open to receiving questions. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Faith, for giving us that background in Kenya. Of course, if like what you're saying, if people can't afford 2 meals a day, they can't afford housing, what else will people do than to fight back? And the mass movement in Kenya against President Ruto's IMF finance bill is such an inspiration for all of us fighting back against these IMF World Bank impositions. And I will say that all of us will hold high, truly, all of those lives that you mentioned have been lost in just this struggle alone, and forever in the fight for freedom in Kenya and all around the world. Thank you so much, comrade. I now want to pass it to our final speaker. And again, we'll give another 10 minutes to Rodolfo Lahoy, who is the current policy head at Ibon International, working on development finance, the IMF World Bank, and development cooperation. Rodolfo, floor is yours.
Thanks, Cody, and comrades, colleagues who are here this afternoon, this evening, this morning, depends on where you are. So I have a set of slides which are only photos. So slides, please. So I'm gonna talk about two countries who have also shown resistance in the past few years against the bank and the fund. Um, I will concentrate a bit on Sri Lanka and Argentina. Um, and I will, try to tell, their stories along the way. So, okay, thanks for that. So, we can go to the second slide already. So okay. So at least globally, we know people's actions and protests have been increasing. And the IMF is aware of this. No? The IMF is saying now that unrest, they call it unrest in 2023 has returned to levels similar to those seen in 2017 and 2018. So that's not surprising given all the uprisings, mass demonstrations, active struggles from Palestine, Bangladesh, in Kenya, like Faith said, in Nigeria, among others, no? Even in the United States. So a common thread in these protests are how they are directing it to the effects of plunder, imperialist war, and repression under the current economic system. So these includes contesting the power of elites and the institutions that back them, including the bank and the fund. So for the IMF, as you can see there, that unrest, as they call it, is actually a risk to the global economy. They view unrest as an economic problem in that it would affect economic growth, imperialist economic growth. And on the other hand, on the side of the people, this resistance is not new. In the 80 years of this institutions across decades, people have condemned these US-led institutions for loans, harmful projects, for imposing policies that destroy economies. A fact that continues into the present economic system today. So indeed, previously some have even called the IMF as a reverse Robin Hood, taking wealth away from the poor and giving it to the rich. And I think that's a consistent story throughout time. No? When we go to the next slide, we'll see that that's the story of Argentina. No? Argentina and what they call in Spanish Fondo Monetario Internacional or FMI. The protest that you see here was held in 2022. During this time, there was a center-left government in the country, and they were speaking in public about trying to hold back the billions, 44 billion in US dollars that they owe to the IMF. You know, and the people's organizations and social movements were continuing the protests, you know, that they've started in the previous years. Why? Because people's fear that continuing the IMF loan with Argentina means increasing the cost of utilities, reduction in social service budgets, cutting the wages of state employees, pensions, and social spending. Because these were the policies that the IMF imposed even in the 2000s and even up to 2018. So in this protest, you can see that the people are directing their anger against the IMF as a US-led institution, you know, as a grim reaper, you know, whose appearance signals death. You know? And this is what they did in the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so they burned that effigy of the IMF, and some are saying that, you know, they're worried that the IMF will meddle in Argentina's own internal issues. They're saying that the loan agreement with the IMF is a colonization agreement, and in our words, perhaps it's an imperialist agreement, which can only bring more crisis adjustment, structural adjustment, which Azra talked about, and more poverty. Next slide. Some are even saying, some protesters are saying, and this is what's written here in the sign below. No? Better to die standing than live on our knees. That may be an apt line because the struggle continues as Argentina held another election in late 2023. So guess who won? Another hardcore right-wing neoliberal named Javier Milei. And then Javier Milei, less than a year into his office, protests rage again in the country because his Senate approved a bill that deregulated the economy and removed the labor protections for workers. No, under that law, you know, corporations will have a greater leeway to hire and fire, and workers will have to undergo probationary periods that are longer, from 3 months to 8 months. So Milei also cut subsidies, laid off thousands of government employees. So the result, in short, it's recession, more poverty rising by 55%, and inflation rising by 300%. So the workers are not happy. Guess who is happy? The IMF, who said that the government was doing bold actions to restore macroeconomic stability, and then supported that government by releasing another 4.7 billion of money to the government. So next slide on Argentina. This just shows that the level of opposition in the country against the IMF is historical. It has a bad reputation in Argentina due to its deadly role in the 2001 crisis, as it imposed, you know, neoliberal austerity policies, which cut real wages by 20% and afflicted, you know, more than half of all Argentinians under extreme poverty. So by now, the Argentina is actually on its 23rd loan program with the IMF. So in short, every time the IMF comes in, the Argentinian people get deja vu. This has happened before, and they have resisted it before. From there we go to Sri Lanka for a bit. We hear a slightly similar story. Its 2023 loan with the IMF was its 17th 17 loan with the IMF. So the president who was in power from 2022 to 2024, Ranil Wickremesinghe, borrowed billions from the IMF, worth 2.9 billion, to supposedly bail out the country in crisis. And the Sri Lankan people were forced to swallow a bitter pill. And in that banner, you can see that, you know, IMF, your bitter pill is killing us. That's what they're saying. Because the bitter pill, you know, what the people were forced to swallow were cuts in electricity subsidies, the doubling of value-added taxes, the increase in electricity rates by 165%, among others. No? And this just to pay the debt of the Sri Lanka to whom? No? By June 2023, 40% of Sri Lanka's debt is actually owed to the financial markets, the private lenders. 30% were owed to multilateral banks, including 11% to the IMF and 16% to the ADB. And then another 30% to other governments, including developed countries, but also China. So unions actually held strikes to demand the reversal of these new taxes, reduced power rates, and movements were also calling the government to junk the plans to privatize state-owned companies. So a protester in 2023 was quoted as saying that do not kill people just to pay the debt. Next slide. So these again, more photos of protests wherein youth were saying that we have to stand against the IMF, and the people are also saying that we have to bring power back to the people. That 2023 loan was supposed to be a solution, a bailout. As economic crises racked Sri Lanka rather, amid the pandemic, wherein people faced shortages of goods, like food, medicine. They felt terrible inflation. They experienced power outages. Under another president, the president that they ousted, by the way. The government under then President Rajapaksa, who came from a class of big landlords, he was the one who defaulted or on the debt of Sri Lanka to the IMF. Defaulted meaning they declared that the country was unable to pay its 51 billion foreign debt by April 2022. So 3 months after that, after various big protests and state violence, that president was forced to resign, and the people stormed the presidential palace. And this was a time when Sri Lanka's debt was rising in a time of global economic turbulence. Global oil prices were rising, and US interest rates were rising and putting pressure on the dollars of the country. In short, their dollars were stretched. They have to pay their foreign debts, and they also have to import for the goods that they don't have. Actually, less than 2 weeks ago, Sri Lanka held another elections, and then I think a leftist candidate was elected. So currently, it's a wait and see situation when it comes to their relationship with the IMF.
And
Down
just
to
a
my
1-minute time check, Rodolfo.
Exactly. Thanks, Cody. So I won't talk about this much, but resistance also continues in Pakistan because that country is in its 24th loan with the IMF in more than six decades already. So the resistance of the people continues, and Azra will be more than capable of expanding on that. Next slide. So again, Faith talked about this. How Kenya, people are also saying that Kenya is not the IMF slab rat, as you can see in the right, while even the youth are mobilizing to reject the neoliberal dictates of the IMF. So last two slides, if I may, just to highlight the need to continue these struggles, because the bank and the fund today continue to, create the posture that they have the solutions to the crises in the same way that they did before. For instance, the World Bank is even saying that it's reforming itself to continue its operations around the world under the guise of being able to respond to crises like the climate crisis. Last slide. This is just to, bring that last point. So amid all these and all the discussions that Azra and Sir Roland and Faith discussed, you have to ask the question, is reform, as the World Bank is saying, really the appropriate response to these institutions that have been existing for the interests largely and mainly exclusively of the financial oligarchy and the elites? So yeah, I think it's clear from the discussions of everyone here, that the struggle should be in the direction of this photo in the slide. So I stop there, Cody, and long live international solidarity.
Long live international solidarity. Thank you so much, Rodolfo. Really giving us a crash course of all of the different movements in many countries around the world. We wish we could have had speakers from all of these countries here to also tell us. But again, that's why we have this campaign, to really bring our experiences together and show how this is not just about one community. It's not just about one country. It's about all of us fighting to reclaim our future by shutting down the IMF World Bank. And that's my last reminder to everyone to get your cards ready that we'll use for the photo action at the end. So we put in the chat some of the slogans that you can write. Before we do that, we have a few minutes left for some final responses from our speakers, from some of the questions posed by our attendees. There's some questions that were posed earlier, as well as in the chat that we didn't get to. And so I'm going to pose these questions to our speakers so that we can have enough time. And again, any more questions you have, this campaign will be ongoing. There's plenty of other times for us to keep talking and keep the conversation going. But to all four of our speakers that we've had, I want to pose two questions that are kind of summarized from ones that we had from the audience. One is in terms of debt, national debt that the IMF and World Bank and foreign loans riddles our economy with. What are some of the similarities and differences about the debt of imperialist countries themselves and the debt of semi-colonial countries in the global south? What are some of the similarities and differences and how that debt works and how it impacts people? And a final one is really, how do we struggle against the banks? You know, the banks that are bankrolling all of these wars of aggression and counterinsurgency around the world. How do we actually fight back to defeat the power of the banks? So I'll pose those to our four speakers to see who wants to take one or both of those questions for around 10 or so minutes. Anyone? Roland, Azra, Faith, Rodolfo?
Well, I could start, and then colleagues, comrades can just add. So, on the first question, I think that there's a fundamental difference. No? For instance, the debt of the United States, I think they have, the short answer is that they can print dollars. There's the fact of the dollar domination of the United States all over the world. Most of the debts of countries are foreign debts of countries are in dollars. So this is one reason among others, as to how they can sustain perpetual deficits and perpetual debt splurges without that all big of a negative effect in the economy, which is fundamentally different with how debt is being imposed in semi-colonies, which are used to further destroy the agriculture and national industries of countries in the way that perhaps it could be said that there's this vicious cycle of taking away, natural resources from semi-colonies and how debt is a tool to do that. So while, countries like semi-colonies and countries like the Philippines, for example, and other countries around the world are being saddled with debt, which they cannot pay, which cannot be paid, they are forced to be tied more to export their raw materials just to gain more foreign currency rather, to pay that unpayable debt to the global institutions. So while neoliberalization and the destruction of local industry and agriculture happens, in parallel is the deepening of the chronic indebtedness of these countries. So maybe that's somewhat of a simplistic way to answer it, but that's one thing that we can say. As to how we can resist and continue to resist, so I think these kinds of activities are important, wherein we review, touch base with each other, refresh our understanding, deepen our common understanding about these institutions. And I guess moving forward, the task is do more in your countries. After this webinar, go back to your communities, go back to our national context and study how the dictates and impositions of the bank and the fund are playing out. And then relate those dictates with real people's concerns. For instance, in the Philippines, we know that the current tax reform laws imposed by the government are World Bank conditionalities. We know that the phase out of jeepneys is linked to conditionalities as well of these institutions. We even know, for instance, did you know that the World Bank actually has a flood control project that was signed under the previous administration and was supposed to end under the current administration? And we know that in reality, those flood control projects, we don't feel them in reality. So those kinds of things, let's study more how how these impositions concretely look like in our country so that we can oppose them through linking them with the concerns of workers, peasants, indigenous peoples, the urban poor, who are the ones really affected by the opaqueness, in the end of how these programs, policies, and loans aren't really revealed to the public. So yeah, I guess the struggles will have to continue, most especially at the national level, so that we can weaken the power of the IMF and the World Bank and US imperialism blow by blow. Thanks.
Right on. Thank you so much, Rodolfo. Maybe Azra will go next to you.
Thank you, Cody, and thank you for the questions. So just to be brief, I think there are many similarities in terms of hiking up prices and export-import. I think are very similar. I think what I find different between China and the US forms of loan lending is China actually just takes over, there's a port in Sri Lanka, it's one example. The port in Pakistan has been paid for by the Chinese and they have a 50-year lease on it. And so that is very telling. They have, they build economic pressure. The Americans don't work like that. They really just want their corporations to come in and they make sure that they and their allies, after, I think, Gaza, what we are seeing is that since Pakistan is a Muslim country, they play on religion. Religion is a key card which the Americans play with, and sectoral violence. They are very violent in how they disrupt our communities, create divisions amongst the people. So they are very fascist in the way they really employ their mechanisms. We have now religious divisions, we have sectoral divisions, we have all forms, women, especially the women card is constantly played by the US agency. And then the most destructive, I think they are that they really, really make sure that all production facilities in our countries are just destroyed and dismantled. And immediately, in place of our own local companies or small businesses, we find these huge mega corporations coming in and taking over the services and production from them. On what to do, I think Jay had it right, absolutely right. There is no other way but to go back to the people, find out what is happening to them. They are the best voices of truth. They know exactly what is happening. They may have never heard of the IMF, that's fine, but they know what is happening in their lives. And it is our task to do the fact findings and then bring the impacts on the communities to the macroeconomics of why it is happening and who are the perpetuators and who are these imperialist organizations. I think our task after COVID and after now, especially the genocide, is so much. I am very sorry to say this, but it's easier because the skull of the United States is now very apparent to everybody. Everybody knows who the United States is, not China as yet. So that's another difference I would like to bring out, that we have 500 years of European colonization and we know the Europeans and the Americans in and out. We have nothing left in terms of any facade. It's all gone. The Chinese are new players and it will take time for people to have that kind of animosity. And the Chinese are also not that as yet, I will say, not as brutal as the Americans as yet. But I have no hope. Personally, I believe an imperialist is an imperialist, and one needs to just believe in self-reliance, self-determination, and sovereignty. And that is what we need to build up from the ground to, whether it's peaceful struggles or armed struggle, whatever it takes. We just need to get rid of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Azra. Indeed, the people really are the true voices of truth, like you said. And if our movements don't carry their experiences and voices, they won't win. But when they do, we will win one way or another. I'll pass it. We have about 5 minutes left for our last two speakers. Maybe I'll pass it first to Roland, and then we'll give Faith the last word for these two questions.
Yes, U.S. Imperialism is in a grave crisis today, not only because it is faced by so many local resistance, not just by peoples, but even by some progressive states, no, in Latin America, in the Middle East, and so forth, no. And on the other hand, it's also faced with the challenge of a new player in the international order, no? And here I'm talking about China and some of its allies like Russia and including India and the BRICS countries, no? Now, U.S. imperialism is in a grave crisis. From our perspective, the people's perspective, especially, let them wallow in their crisis and let them try to solve it, no, themselves, because we should not be the one trying to solve it for them, no, their crisis, because precisely we want these contradictions to be in our favor, and that's why I would propose that we study carefully the vulnerabilities and weaknesses of imperialism today, because one of the key contradictions, internal contradictions, which I've shared in the chat box, is the uh, uh, conflict, no, especially conflict that's becoming serious between the militarist factions of the U.S. Ruling elite, no, which in the past few decades are becoming more and more the dominant factor in shaping imperial state policies, no? Where U.S. empire building is prioritizing military expansion and budgets at the cost of Western economic interests, no? Especially traditional Western economic interests, no? So this conflict, and earlier in my presentation, that's why I presented the factions of the U.S. ruling elite, which are also the competing lobbies, no, in terms of influencing U.S. Domestic and foreign policy, because these contradictions, I think, can be exploited to our advantage from the perspective of the people's movement, which has long been attacked by U.S. imperialism and its militarist allies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roland. Faith, we'll pass it to you. Again, the question really, how do we fight back against the banks, against the militarists? How do we really fight and reclaim our future?
Yeah, thank you. I think one is sharing experiences like we are right now. We need to understand the struggles that the other peoples are fighting against, which is very important. Second one, you need to expose the IMF and World Bank, and also the loans, and also fight against the austerity measures that they're pushing our governments to put in place for them. I think the other thing is to fight against imperialism, not only nationally, but I think not only nationally, but also internationally, because I think international solidarity is very important, but unity is also very important. I think lastly is offer each other solidarity, because one, in Kenya, when we were fighting against IMF, and which we're still doing. It's the solidarity that we got from outside world that made us keep pushing, and which we still are. Even when the government is killing us, when the government is abducting us, we're still pushing, even in the midst of the threats that we're receiving from the government. So the solidarity is very important. But also is create alternatives. Lastly, is to create alternatives, because our people do not understand why we are fighting against the IMF. Some people might not understand. Some people might not understand what alternative we want to put in place. So we also need to organize, to really, really organize the people. We need to educate our people, but also we need to not carry this fight as if it's a part. It's like us, we are the liberators. The people need to be part of this fight and fight towards the liberation together. Because one of the challenges I saw in Kenya is that it was mostly young people who are on the streets. Where were the older generation? We need to fight hand in hand, and the people need to understand that it's not a fight for this generation and the other one watching. It's a fight for all of us. We need to fight against this, all of us. So I think that is what I would say. And lastly, lastly is to fight to actually stop the bonds using and towards sovereignty, our own sovereignty and our own economic liberation as a people. So I think I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faith. There's no better way to end a teach-in than what you just said. Solidarity and unity are our biggest weapons of all the people all around the world, and sovereignty truly in all of the people's hands. That really, there's no other way that we should end a really incredible teach-in like this for a very significant campaign than to say the words that you've probably, if you've tuned in or been part of any kind of ILPS event or rally or action, you've heard our main slogan, long live international solidarity. That's what it's going to take. I already see people getting ready for our photo, just to remind everyone to get your placards, your paper out with our slogans. Before we take this photo, I wanted to again thank you all for coming. We had almost 150 people at different parts throughout today. I wanted to thank all of our speakers, Azra, Roland, Rodolfo, Faith, for really laying out all the different ways that the IMF World Bank is against us, but also all the ways that we are uniting against them to reclaim our future. On October 8th, and this is wonderful, I'm seeing all the people, all of you with all of your placards to show just how united we are in this movement. I will say, and I think in the chat, we'll drop the information for the next webinar in the campaign, which is going to be on October 8th. And this one is going to be titled Shut Down the IMF World Bank, Why Shut It Down? And this one will be focused more on the resistance movements like we're talking about here. And what are the different strategies and tactics that our movements should keep in mind when we're fighting to shut down the IMF World Bank and ultimately to shut down and bring down imperialism. So we hope you can check that out in the chat and continue to follow the organizers to tune in for that October 8th webinar. But for now, I'll also get my placard up here. Please open up your cameras if you haven't already. And I'll let someone from our tech team set us up with the photo. I don't know if that's
Hi, I'll
Agatha.
be taking the photo. Okay. Open your cameras and raise your calls. 1, 2, 3. Okay, another one. Just a sec. 1, 2, 3. Another one. And the last one. Cody, can you lead the chant? Just the last one. Thank you.
Yes, one of our favorite things. If you can unmute yourself We're going to see how much we can stay in unison with this one. I'm going to chant long live, and you're all going to say international solidarity. Long live
international solidarity.
Long live
international solidarity.
Now repeat after me. Shut down the IMF World Bank.
Shut down the World Bank.
IMF World Bank.
Shut down the IMF World Bank.
Shut down the
IMF World Bank.
Fight for our future.
Fight for our
future.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you again so much to all of our speakers and attendees. Again, if we can drop the link to the final October 8th webinar in the chat, come down to the Why Shut It Down webinar next, and keep up the fight. From now, for as long as it takes, as many generations as it takes, continue the fight, defeat imperialism, and build a future for all of those who will come after us. Thank you all. Long live international solidarity.
Long live.